Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So my name's Jess. I'm one of the physiotherapists working at On Your Game. So tonight's my first live, so hopefully everything goes okay. So let's start off with introducing today's topic. Today we're going to be talking about isometric exercises, why we use them, why we prescribe them, and then how to perform them correctly. So to start off with, I just want to discuss the different types of strengthening that you might be familiar with. So the first type is isotonic. So these kind of exercises are ones where you are both lengthening and then shortening your muscle. So kind of thinking about your bicep curls, your squats, your shoulder press, that sort of thing. Whereas isometrics are exercises where your muscle is contracting, but it's not lengthening or shortening. So you think about your planks, your wall sits, any kind of exercise where you are stationary but your muscles are most definitely still working. That's an isometric exercise. So why do we prescribe them? One of the key reasons why we give these exercises at the beginning of rehabilitation is because they're really safe. So because you're stationary, you can really control how much force you're putting through the exercise. You can control kind of your pain level, and often we get you to only push as far as pain allows. So you can really tailor that. Also, they're really adaptable, so you can change the joint angle at which you perform them. You can change the contraction intensity, so kind of how much force you're putting through, how much the duration is, so how long you actually hold it for. All of these things can be adapted and tailored to the individual, which makes them a really useful tool. Next, you also don't require any equipment to use them. There might be a couple of times where we get you to use a prop such as a ball or a towel or something, but 9 times out of 10 you can do these without any equipment whatsoever. So that makes it really accessible, really affordable, and also less excuses on not doing them. And finally, they're probably one of the least painful forms of strengthening exercises that you can do. And some research suggests that they might even have a short-term pain-relieving effect for up to 45 minutes. So it's in my best interest to give you an exercise that's strengthening but also potentially pain-relieving, because then you're more likely to do it. It's obvious that, if you're given exercises to do that you find painful, you're probably not going to do them. And as someone who's prescribing your exercise program, if you don't do them, you're less likely to progress and you're less likely to recover as fast. So yeah, loads and loads of benefits as to why we give isometric exercises. So let's go into a bit more detail now about why they reduce pain. In order to explain it, I want to just very briefly explain why we feel pain in the first time. It's a really complex subject, and we could do a whole other live on pain and why we feel it, if that's something that you're interested in. But in very loose terms, we feel pain because we've got a brain and a nervous system. And nerves are basically the electrical circuit that allow us to both move our muscles, and they also provide us with sensation. So they allow us to kind of feel stuff on our skin, they allow us to feel kind of deeper within the muscle, and obviously one of those sensations can be pain. And so when we contract a normal muscle, the kind of neural pathways going from our muscle to our brain are able to be transmitted as normal, and there's no disruption there. But when a movement is painful, some of those neural pathways can be disrupted. And so doing isometrics, the research suggests that through doing them, they can improve the sending of these neural pathways from the brain to the muscle and vice versa. And so in turn, they reduce pain, or the pain that you experience when you're doing that painful movement. And as I said earlier, really interestingly, some studies suggest that doing isometrics can reduce pain for up to 45 minutes, even after performing them. So again, if I can give you an exercise that's going to be less painful for you to perform, potentially give you a pain relieving effect afterwards as well, it's a win-win situation really. So now we're going to move on to a couple of examples of how to perform them. So we'll start off with a knee isometric. So if you've ever had any kind of knee pain and, you know, just moving it or even just sitting is painful for the knee, or whether you're post-surgery or something like that and you've got like post-operative restrictions, sometimes you're not allowed to weight bear on the knee. So this is a really good one to start off with. So I'll start off with this one. I'm going to bring you down to the floor. Okay, so firstly, just lying, or sitting rather, with your leg out long. You can do this with a towel or without. I'm just going to show you with, just to kind of give you a better idea about how the quadricep is contracting. But the idea of this exercise is to get the quadricep muscles stronger again and getting them contracting. So pop a towel just underneath your knee, and you want your foot flexed so that your whole leg is engaged. And then all you do is you push your knee down into the towel and keep your foot flexed, and you just hold it for a set duration. I'll go on to kind of how we prescribe reps and sets in a second, and then you release. But all as I say, the idea is that you're extending the knee, pushing down into that towel and really getting that thigh muscle to contract. And that's one way of getting the muscle to start strengthening without the need to really be bending the knee or anything like that. Because often if you've got knee pain, bending the knee is probably one of the more painful movements to do. Whereas with this isometric, you're not getting any of that kind of lengthening or shortening. You've just got to focus on contracting the muscle, pushing down, and then releasing. Okay? So the next one I want to go through is an ankle isometric. Often with ankle sprains, they can be really, really painful. Some of them not, but often the ones we see in clinic, you know, people are having a real issue with pain or loss of range of movement or something. This is quite a nice one to start getting the ankle working again. So before I show you the exercise, I want to show you the kind of the movements of the foot first. So we have both dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, and then we also have inversion and eversion. And often when we sprain our ankles, we get pain kind of on the outside of our foot. And so the isometric exercise is attempting to do the eversion movements, but obviously not contracting that muscle or the tendon. So using a block or a wall or something like that, you basically stationary stand, you're pushing your foot just to the side, trying to do that eversion movement. And again, you would just sustain that contraction for a period of time and then relax. And you can see I'm holding onto the door here. This isn't a balance exercise, this is purely strengthening and trying to get that pain level down. And so you would just hold it there and then relax, holding on for a bit of balance if you need to. And then the final one I want to discuss or show you is a shoulder exercise. So something else that's really common in a clinic is rotator cuff issues. And the rotator cuff is responsible for one particular movement, external rotation, so anything kind of coming away from the body here, coming up and behind your head, that sort of thing. And usually this one is probably one of the most painful movements in someone that's got a rotator cuff injury. And so this is one where you don't need any equipment whatsoever. All you need is your other hand. And so what you would do is coming into like a 90-degree angle, so your elbow's bent, your shoulder is relaxed, and all you're trying to do is attempt to open out the hand, but your other hand blocks it. And again, I'm just pushing into my hand and sustaining that contraction for, again, however long you've been prescribed. And again, because these are so adaptable, you can just push with a very, very small amount. The force that you apply really doesn't matter when it comes to muscle hypertrophy and strengthening. It does play a part in something else, which I'll discuss in a minute. But really, it's just about sustaining that contraction at a level that's comfortable for you to do. So we never want these to be painful, we just want you to be able to feel that contraction going on in the shoulder, and really to then just do as many as you can. And then obviously with the aim of progressing to then being able to open out either with a band or something like that. The isometric exercise is this one. Okay, so now we'll go back and we'll just quickly discuss how you would prescribe them depending on what you're trying to achieve. So more often than not, we're trying to achieve strengthening and muscle hypertrophy, which is kind of enlargement of the muscles. And so when this is concerned, the main things that are most important in terms of how these are prescribed is your time under tension, so your total time performing the exercises, and the duration. So, for example, you could do kind of 3 sets of 5 seconds, but if you do 3 sets of 10 seconds, that's always going to be better, because the duration is more important than the total time. So if in doubt, just hold it for longer and sustain that contraction for as long as you can. And whenever I'm setting any kind of strengthening exercise, I always tell people to do it to fatigue. Now, it's very unlikely that you're going to fatigue with an isometric exercise, because it's not exactly like an aerobic exercise or anything like that. But generally, the more you can do, the better. The stronger you're going to get, the more muscle hypertrophy you're going to get. So duration of that contraction is the most important thing when you're being prescribed an isometric exercise. And then the next thing that's really important isn't always applicable, because it's really patient dependent on and where they get their pain. So for example, with kind of any kind of elbow tendonitis issue, some people might get pain when they're pushing against it when the elbow's fully bent, in which case this is the angle that you would do it at. But otherwise, if you get pain at any point in the elbow when you're pushing down into extension, so elbow straightening, then actually the longer that tendon can be when it's being contracted, the better. So actually in this case, your tricep would be at its longest state when the elbow is flexed. So this would be the best position to do an isometric in. The opposite way, the bicep is at its longest when your elbow is straight. So this would be the best position to do a bicep isometric, where you're then trying to flex the elbow. Okay. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the amount of force that you put through either the hand or the block or the towel or whatever you're using, it really, really doesn't matter when it comes to strengthening and muscle hypertrophy. When it does become really important is when you're trying to work on a tendon such as the Achilles, because with an Achilles you want the tendon to actually get thicker and stiffer rather than flexible and loose. So in this sense, you would want the force to be as much as you can. Obviously, the issue with that is if it's a new injury, then that can be quite painful, but it's something that you can build up to doing. So you can gradually build up by either pushing with 10% and then 50% or whatever you can manage. And one way that we might measure this is getting you to do it in clinic and pushing against like a dynamometer, which is a tool that allows us to see how much pressure you're pushing through. We wouldn't expect you to do that at home, but it's just to give you an idea of how much you're pushing, but also you'd be guided by your pain. And then the final thing that you really want to think about when you're being prescribed an exercise is, again, for that tendon stiffness and thickening, it also counts as to how quickly you apply that force. So what the proper term is applying the force ballistically. So you go from kind of no force to then suddenly pushing against the hand. And this is because, for example, the Achilles tendon, it's often put under stress where you're stationary and then pushing off, such as going from a standstill to a sprint and that sort of thing. So you want to train the tendon in that environment. But again, this is something that you might have to build up to doing, because often doing that quick force will be painful. But otherwise, generally, when we're setting isometrics, the goal is strengthening and muscle hypertrophy, in which case force, the amount of force put through doesn't matter. It's all to do with how long you hold it for. And so really, the more you do, the better. Okay, so that's how to prescribe them, depending on what you're trying to achieve. And a couple of examples depending on kind of the injury that you've got or the type of pain that you've got. But the amazing thing about isometrics is that really whichever muscle or kind of area of pain, there is an isometric that we can adapt and begin with. So they're really, really useful exercises to kind of start off your rehabilitation, get you kind of involved and encouraged to do the exercises as well, because I think when people start their rehabilitation plan, it can take a little bit of time to get into a routine with them. But if you're given one that's kind of easy to do and doesn't cause you any pain, and you can see it starting to make a difference in your pain levels as well, then you're more likely to progress and, as I say, recover in the long term. So they're really, really useful. So with this live, sorry, I've rushed through it. There has been a tiny bit of overlap with a live that Nat did a couple of weeks ago on hypertrophy. So if you haven't seen that and you're wondering what muscle hypertrophy is all about and why we want it, definitely check that out to gain a better understanding about hypertrophy in general. And if you've got any questions, feel free to write in the comments. And if you're interested in reading the evidence behind today's talk as well, then I'll pop that in the comments too. And finally, if you are suffering with an injury and you would like some help with it, do leave a message in the comments and one of the team will gladly get back to you soon. Right. So thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to doing another subject soon. Bye.